Hi, my name is Jerica Hucke, and I'm the Draper for the Joffrey Ballet. Today, I want to teach you how to create specialty cosplay accessories. Here is a list of the tools and materials you will need to get the most out of this tutorial.
Heat gun or hair dryer, baking sheet, aluminum foil, X-Acto knife, scissors, thermoplastic, Sharpie, and pen.
Let's get started.
If you've been following along with my cosplay craft tutorial process, then you'll know that we've reached the third installment of my cosplay build of Tisiphone from the game Hades by Supergiant Games. And you'll also know that the moment is here. It's finally time to make my favorite accessory from Tisiphone's outfit, the spiked collar. In order to recreate Tisiphone's incredible collar piece, I'm going to show you a couple of my favorite techniques for working with thermoplastics. You may not be familiar with the term thermoplastic, but you've almost certainly encountered it. The popular cosplay material Warbler is just one of the many forms of thermoplastic. The type I'm working with today is called solid protoplast and requires a heat gun or hairdryer or hot water. Here I'm using a ballpoint pen to trace a paper pattern I made onto the smooth side of the protoplast. This pattern is my educated guess on what will create the spike shape I want, which is a curved full body that quickly comes to a small point. If I find that these don't work exactly as I intended, they'll be easy to alter while I'm shaping them. More on that later. You can see that I'm using two different sizes and trying to fill up the space as much as I can. This is to save cutting time and prevent waste. The easiest way to cut these out is to use an X-Acto knife or something similar. Craft scissors will work but are not ideal. Make sure you have a sharp blade. About halfway through cutting these, I realized that the blade was so dull that the pressure I was exerting was causing my hand to cramp. So I replaced the blade and it went so much faster. I'm also collecting all of my scraps to use for later. Here is the first technique I want to show you. I let my heat gun warm up as per the instructions that came with it. I have it on the low air setting and a medium-high temp. I always work over a heat-resistant surface, and I found that aluminum baking sheets that are flat work best for me. Here I'm preheating the protoplast. I know it's ready to shape when it curls up. I curl it so the edges meet and press them together as smoothly as I can. This is the name of the game. Shaping until it cools off, applying a little heat, then shaping until it cools again, or until the shape is to your liking. Rinse and repeat with the larger spike. The second technique is my favorite, but is usually the last I get to play with because it requires scraps. For the smallest spikes, it will be easier to sculpt them, so I heat up 4 little scraps of protoplast until they curl, then press them together into a ball. I reheat that until it's a good sculpting consistency. Don't get it too hot or it will turn to mush and burn your hands. And get to work shaping it into the perfect tiny spike. Now it's time for the collar itself. Because I work in a costume shop, I have access to this dress form, which has similar measurements to me. I'm making a pattern for the collar on butcher paper, which I will then cut out, lay on the thermoplastic, trace, and cut using the method I used earlier for the spikes. This is for the third technique for working with protoplast, and that is molding. This dress form also comes in handy as a built-in shoulder mold. You can use whatever you have on hand that is heat resistant and non-stick, or that can be made heat resistant and non-stick by covering it in aluminum foil, like I'm doing here. Once your mold is properly heat-proofed, carefully lay your cut protoplast on it and heat the bits that need shaping or connection points. For me, that's the neckline for shaping and shoulders, where I will be connecting the back panel as well as sculpting a point into the curve. Then, using the form underneath, I can press and mold the protoplast into one smooth piece. Molding your thermoplastic over an existing form is really useful if you need to make multiple copies of one item or if you need to make a large shape that has to be heated in sections. We've created the two main elements of the collar. Now we've got to merge them. The first step is marking where the spikes will be. I'm eyeballing where I want my spikes to go based on the two sets of Tisiphone renderings I have, then tracing the base of each spike with a Sharpie onto the collar. I'm not being quite as meticulous as I could be here. I didn't measure the distances between spikes on both sides to make sure every spike was perfectly mirrored, but you could. Tisiphone feels a bit more organic than that, so some of the spikes are going to be a little uneven. I need a way to adhere the spikes to the collar. Since I used two different sculpting methods when making the spikes, I'm going to use two different joining methods. You can see that I've cut holes only in the spaces where I'm putting the larger hollow spikes, and I've also cut them slightly smaller than the circles I drew. This is so that I can adhere the spikes with a doubly strong bond of the protoplast. First, I heat the thermoplastic until it softens, aiming for the small ring left between the Sharpie circle and the hole I cut. Then I heat the base of the spike and push it up through the opening. As the spike's sides start to touch the collar, I can press the two layers together until they are bonded, making sure my spike is angled in toward the neck as I do so. Because I cut the circle smaller, when I turn the collar over, there is still some unsecured leftover spike. I clip into it with scissors, turning the leftovers into tabs I can use as additional connection between my spikes and my collar. Since I've been using heat all over this thing, it has gotten a little out of shape. I've already had to reshape a couple of the spikes because I forgot they were still warm and flipped the collar over too soon. This is not a problem. Protoplast is pretty reshapeable. I've still got my dress form foiled from before, so we just need to secure the collar to it and we can get to work using the same heat and press method as I did when I was first molding it. I'm killing two birds with one stone here because I also need to use the form for my second spike adherence method. Now that my collar is back in shape, it's time for the final step. I heat the small circles on the collar, then heat the bottom of the small spikes until they get shiny. Once both are ready, I press the small spike directly onto the collar. Having a form underneath this prevents the spike from pushing the collar back out of shape. This is a quicker method and works well for small elements. And that's how you make a spiked collar. Wearable sculpture can be a little intimidating, but the great thing about these thermoplastics is that every failure is just an opportunity to learn how your material behaves. Don't be afraid to try new things.
Thanks for joining me today. Make sure to follow @YOUmedia on Instagram and Twitter, and @Chicago Public Library on Instagram. And tag CPL Radical Fit, YOUmedia, and YOUmedia Chicago when you post your creations. Feel free to follow me @JJ Costumes on Instagram. I can't wait to see what you make.